Good morning, guys. This is going to be my video about the first half of the second lesson of this week, '08 Natural Selection. I'm going to do a separate video for the second half. That's all about the practice problems. This one's going to give you all the vocab, all the background. I'll do as much explanation as I can to kind of get you guys ready to do the practice problems. That way it gives me lots of time. So I'm looking at the first slide here. This is the second of two science lessons this week. Should take us a while. Should be over an hour to do all this if we're doing it slowly, I think, for most kids. This is our best guess. If you have a question, click here, open this document, and write on it. This is our 7th grade science question doc. Ms. Beatty and I will both be checking this document as much as possible. Here are some questions back from the mutations week. I want to know, are ligers a thing? That's a thing. We're going to talk about species today. So if you come up with cool questions like this, put them in the document. Could be about the lesson, could be about just something you're thinking about when you're reading today's lesson. We'll try to respond. You guys can respond to each other. And that way, maybe you have a question, you open up this document, and right away, you see someone else has already asked it. I've already answered it. Now you got the answer. You're back in business. Remember that if you see a slide or a box that has a blue background or another color, those are information. I want you to read that. I don't need you to type into it or anything like that. Any slide though that is white, or a little box on a slide that's white, these are things I want you to respond to. Please turn these in when you're done so your teachers can read them, give you feedback, let you know how you did, let you know if everything you're thinking makes sense. Okay, so here is our do now. It's both in Espanol, it's in English here. I want you to tell me things in your life that make you feel pressure. That is especially true now with everyone stuck at home. Maybe you can think back to what your life is like before that. What makes you feel pressure? What are the things that you worry about? Give me a list. Make this list longer if you want to. Then I want you to think about what types of pressure do you think this zebra is feeling every day. What does she worry about? It's probably not the same thing as you. So just give me like a long sentence. Give me 3-4 things that you think the zebra worries about every day. Now I do want you to pause the video now. Go and do the do now. Come on back and watch it. If keep going with this video. That really gives you a chance to think through some of these ideas cold. This is like a cold open, right? You got to start thinking about it. That way when we go later, you have this starting idea. It's incomplete, and that's fine. And you can start sticking the information I'm giving you in this idea, making it bigger, making it better. If you skip that part, you're not going to retain the information. You're not going to learn the information as well. So please pause the video now and come back after you finish the do now. Okay, let's keep going. I'm looking here at the agenda. I have a scientist of the day for you. Let's talk about the learning target. Let's talk about some vocabulary. I'm basically going to get through this part and kind of an introductory part that I don't have here on the agenda. And then the next video, if you see it on a slide lower down, you'll see another video, and that's all about the practice. I want to really make sure I explain that well. Our scientist of the day is, oh man, I'm not going to try to say his name, Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. Oh man. So this guy was around 1200 years ago. I want you to read this whole thing. But two cool things from this guy that I know. He's like the start, like the godfather of math. So if you like math like I do, this is your guy. The word algebra comes from a book he wrote 1200 years ago. The word algorithm comes from his name. So cool. Okay, so read more about him. Today, remember that our standard is being able to explain how variation of genes, how differences in genes and traits in a population affects individuals' probability of surviving and reproducing in an environment. So I'm going to give you a scenario in those practice problems and on your quiz, and you're going to describe how a population will change over time in its environment. So you're going to need to meet this learning target, you're going to need to read the scenario. You're going to have to describe the selective pressure on the population, determine the trait that is being selected for, and explain how the population will change over time. Now, there are some vocab words like selective pressure, selected for, that we're going to go over right now. Okay, so our first vocab word of the day is the word species. A species is a group of organisms that are really closely related and they're able to reproduce to make fertile offspring in nature. Um, there's a lot of caveats there. Actually, scientists can disagree on what a species is. And there are organisms that we think are different species, and then later we're like, oh, maybe they're the same species. So this definition is kind of loosey goosey, and we do our best to kind of put a box around what a species is. But life is complicated, which is why it's so fun to study, and so it's not always really obvious. So I'll say this, you might think of a butterfly and think of like all butterflies are the same, but there's 20,000 species of butterflies on Earth. About 700 of them live in North America. There's 4,750 species of frogs. No frogs. Frogs are not all the same. They're crazy. There's lots and lots of different kinds of frogs. That means you have two different types of frogs. They look at each other like, I don't know what these guys are. They're not going to reproduce. They think of each other as different enough that they won't even act together. Going back to that question on our questions page, ligers are a real thing. You can Google it. Google a liger. It's not a fake thing. It's a lion and a tiger. They had a baby. And actually, a taion, which is, if you think about a lion, tiger, liger, tiger, lion, taion, is also a real thing. It just changes whether it's the male or lion, the female tiger, or the male tiger and the female lion. But they only exist in zoos because in nature, here's this part of the definition, they don't, tigers and lions live in really different places. Lions live in Africa, tigers live in Asia. They don't cross thousands of miles to go and hang out and reproduce. So those, while it's its own species, we don't really think of it as a species biologically because it can only happen in a zoo. But you can think about how closely related these animals are. Very interesting stuff. Okay, keep moving. Adaptation. It's a physical trait or a behavior that helps a living thing survive and reproduce. Here's a hedgehog. He rolls himself up to protect themselves when he feels threatened. That is a behavior, right? If you're like, oh, I see a coyote, I'm gonna roll myself up into a little ball. That's a behavior keeping him alive. He also has these spines on the back, which maybe if the coyote's like sniffing at him and like touches him with it, like, ow, that kind of hurts my nose. I don't like that. That's a physical trait that is an adaptation as well. It also helps him survive and reproduce. So then he has both. He has a behavior and a physical trait. Here's a picture of some birds. These birds have really different beaks. They're different sizes, they're different shapes. Look at this one, it points up. What the heck is that? Why do you think different birds adapted different beaks? I want you to, when you come back to the slide, or maybe you want to pause and answer it now, what's the point of that? That'll help you think about adaptations. The selective pressure. Okay, guys, this is the word that every year in my many years of teaching this is the most complicated thing for students to learn. So I'm going to do my best to explain it now. Later, if you're still struggling with it, come back to this part of the video and watch it. About 8 minutes in. The reason that some individuals in a population do not survive to reproduce in an environment. So this is a population of hyenas. They all live together. Some of them won't be able to reproduce and pass on their genes. That might be because they die. That might be because they stay alive, but they actually don't still be able to reproduce. The reason that happens, we call a selective pressure. Another way to think about it is anything that makes some individuals more fit than others. Remember, fitness is all about the ability to reproduce. So some individuals have a better ability to reproduce than others. And that reason that they have better is a selective pressure. And the last way to think about this is 3 different ways to think about selective pressure is think about a population of hyenas, of zebras. We're going to talk about zebras. And think about there as being a force from the environment on them, where some die and some live, and that will change the population over time. You give it hundreds of years, and that population of zebras will look different, will behave differently. And that is a selective pressure. Reading this red thing, almost any change in the environment, whether how much food is available, maybe there's a predator eating you. Humans are always messing around and building malls where you're trying to do your thing as an animal. They result in a pressure on a population, and it makes some better fit and more likely to reproduce, some less fit, less likely to reproduce than others. And the organisms that are most fit are selected. They are selected to live and survive and reproduce. More on that in a second. So we have this term, this phrase, natural selection. This is a natural process where only the individuals who are best fit to an environment reproduce and pass on their genes. This leads to a population changing over time. This is similar to artificial selection, which you did last week. In artificial selection, humans choose. We say, that dog is awesome. He's really smart. He's really cute. I want that dog to reproduce. And we actually stop other dogs that we don't want to reproduce from reproducing. Natural selection happens in nature. Because of an environment, some organisms can reproduce and some can't. So here's a little picture over here that kind of breaks it down. There's green and orange beetles in this population. They have natural select. They have genetic variation. The black birds like green beetles. Yum, green beetles, our favorite. And so over time, generations later, there's more orange and fewer green. Generations later, all the green are gone. They're all orange. This probably is a lot like that walking sticks thing you did yesterday. Building on that with our last vocab, I promise it's the last one. If an organism's traits help it to survive and reproduce, those traits become more common. We say those traits are selected for. So these green beetles are not selected for. They're selected against. They became less common. They were like mostly green, and then over time they became maybe half green, and over time they were almost all gone. They were all orange. The orange color is selected for. The green color is selected against. That's what we say. Remember, being selected means you are selected to live and reproduce because nature has decided that you are fit. Because you have the ability, you have the color maybe that these birds don't like. And so because the birds don't like you, they're not going to eat you. You just survived to reproduce. So this gets us back to the do now. What are some reasons that zebras in a population are more likely to reproduce than others? If you want, go back to your do now, and now you're like, okay, I kind of understand selective pressure. Maybe make a list of things that zebras are worried about, things that stop them from reproducing. And this will be the last thing we do on this video. I kind of made this as like a little pre-activity activity, kind of getting us some practice. So I made a table here of selective pressures, and then what that pressure then is causing, what traits are being selected for. Those are adaptations that are happening. So here's the example. Lions eat zebras, duh, and they'll eat any zebra they can catch. They don't care. So that's a pressure. If you have a population of zebras, lions aren't going to catch all of them. They're going to catch some of them. Some of them, most of them, are going to be left alive, but they're going to catch some of them. So this causes a pressure on the population. And zebras are more likely to survive and reproduce if they're fast. If they can run away from the lions, they're more likely to reproduce. If they can sense a lion coming, they can smell the lion, they can see the lion, they can hear the lion, you're more likely to reproduce. If you have this behavior where you stay with the herd and you're like, I'm going to stay with these guys. I'm not going to like dye my hair pink and walk over here and be eaten by the lion by myself. That's a behavior, not a physical trait, but it's an adaptation. It's being selected for. That's why zebras like to hang out together. So that's an example, and I want you to fill in these two slides. Here is another selective pressure. Only some males can mate with the females and reproduce, and they actually fight with each other. Here's a picture of zebras fighting. They fight with each other. So if that's a selective pressure, then what trait would be selected for? What makes some male zebras be able to reproduce? And here's actually a trait. Zebras are more likely to survive if they can find grass and water easily. What type of change in the environment, what kind of selective pressure would cause only zebras that can easily find or can find grass and water well to reproduce, which means others would not be able to? Fill in these two boxes the best you can. That kind of sets you up for the next one. So I'm going to stop this video here. On the next slide, there's going to be another video that kind of walks you through the second part of the lesson. That's all the practice problems. So everything up to now is kind of building, setting the stage. And after that, the next slide will kind of explain to you how to do these different practice problems. And then we have a quiz at the end. So go back, fill out the things we've done so far. As you're reading through it, if you come up with some questions, go to the question doc, fill those out. Feel free always to email your teacher if you have questions as well. I'll see you on the next video.